Pam Bondi has just unveiled a federal warrant against AOC, but the ensuing firestorm took everyone by surprise. The cameras had begun to capture the moment as Pam Bondi approached the podium. The clock had just ticked past 9 a.m. in Sacramento, California, a rather unexpected venue for a DOJ press conference. The journalists whispered among themselves, uncertain of what was to come. She was efficient with her time. Her voice carried a serene yet incisive quality. A federal warrant has been issued for Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, citing obstruction of federal immigration enforcement, she remarked, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. Quietude. Then arrived an overwhelming surge of inquiries. Devices vibrated. News broke on Twitter in mere moments. AOC faces scrutiny from the DOJ. A warrant has been issued. Pam Bondi targets AOC. In an instant, everything transformed. This was not an unauthorized document. It wasn't mere speculation about politics. This document was duly authorized, sealed, and signed. The warrant, as stated by Bondi, was linked to what she described as interference with lawful federal operations, particularly a public campaign that purportedly urged undocumented immigrants to defy cooperation with ICE agents. She offered little more than the fact that the department had examined crucial evidence and that the matter was profoundly serious. She entertained no inquiries. As she descended from the stage, a flurry of reporters called out, "Is this politically motivated? What is AOC up to these days? What implications does this hold for Congress?" Yet Bondi pressed on. She exited the room alongside her aides, her lips firmly sealed. Outside, a crowd was beginning to form. A handful of AOC supporters brandished posters. Some were visibly moved, their eyes glistening with emotion. Some responded loudly to those opposing them. Someone exclaimed that they are attempting to stifle her voice. Within the Capitol, the atmosphere grew charged. Team members repeatedly glanced at their phones, keeping a close eye on social media updates. Congressional members engaged in swift, hushed conversations. No one was willing to comment on the record. Not at this moment. Yet, the reality was that no one had anticipated this turn of events. Not even the representative herself. During the press conference, she found herself on the opposite side of the country, engaging with a community center in Fresno. She had just finished a conversation with local families when her assistant, Jordan, approached with a concerned expression. "You have to check this out," she said, extending her phone towards me. AOC perused the notification, first with a casual glance, then with a more deliberate focus. Her lips parted ever so slightly, yet silence enveloped her. Jordan lingered in anticipation. "She truly accomplished it," AOC finally declared. She truly accomplished it. Deep down, she sensed this transcended mere legality. This was intimate, ideological. A shot fired as a stark warning, directed right at her heart. She surveyed the room, observing the children engaged in play at the back, the older women diligently folding pamphlets at a nearby table, and the vibrant mural that adorned the wall behind them. Understand your entitlements. She played a crucial role in financing that mural. She had been in that same room numerous times, discussing with individuals the steps to take when ICE arrives at your door, how to request a warrant, how to remain silent, and how to safeguard your family. Now the very lesson she had imparted could potentially lead her to a federal courtroom. She glanced over her shoulder at Jordan. "Connect the team on the call. Gather everyone in the war room in 20 minutes. As she stepped through the threshold, cameras poised and ready outside, a single question lingered in the atmosphere. Could this mark the start of a decline for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Yet, as the nation grappled with the shocking news, the narrative had begun unfolding weeks prior, on a serene evening accompanied by a laptop, a microphone, and a message that AOC felt was essential for the public to receive. It started as a subtle initiative to connect. Without any media coverage or headlines, a simple digital flyer circulated on Instagram and was shared among local immigrant communities. The title was straightforward: "Understand your rights in the event of ICE involvement." AOC's team believed it wouldn't stir any controversy. They had accomplished it previously. Community education was familiar to Kerr, yet this particular instance promised to unfold in an unexpected way. The event took place on Zoom, organized by the staff from her district office. The plan was to guide individuals on the steps to take if immigration enforcement arrived at their residence. The communication was unmistakable. It is essential to recognize and comprehend your rights. There was no discussion regarding the violation of any regulations. No one supported concealing anyone. It revolved around the Constitution, specifically the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, straightforward enough, yet simplicity seems a distant memory now. The recording of the webinar didn't go viral overnight. It sat online for a few days until a clip surfaced on a conservative talk show. The host played a section where one of AOC's aides calmly explained that ICE agents can't force their way in without a judicial warrant. The host leaned forward, voice dripping with outrage. This isn't education. This is obstruction. The clip spread like fire. Soon, Tom Homan was on morning shows slamming AOC. She's instructing undocumented immigrants how to, he said on one network. She's helping people break the law under the guise of civil rights. Homan wasn't subtle. He called for the DOJ to step in to review whether what she'd done was even legal. He claimed she was setting a dangerous precedent. Behind closed doors, DOJ officials began taking meetings, quiet ones, the kind where no notes are taken. It wasn't just about politics anymore. There were whispers of internal memos, people using phrases like borderline sedition. Meanwhile, AOC stayed calm, at least in public. When asked about the backlash, she didn't flinch. Knowing your rights is not a crime, she said during an interview in Bakersfield. If teaching someone how to ask for a warrant is illegal, then we have bigger problems than immigration. But her staff felt it. The mood shifted. Reporters started asking sharper questions. Funders grew anxious. Some progressive allies told her behind the scenes to tone it down for now. She refused. A week later, a letter arrived. It wasn't official, not quite, but it came from the DOJ's Office of Legislative Affairs, a carefully worded request for clarification on the nature of the webinar, including details on staff involvement and external coordination. That's when her team knew this was serious. She called an emergency strategy meeting at her local office in Salinas. Her chief of staff, Malik, read the letter out loud. No one spoke for a full minute after he finished. "Do you think they're trying to scare us?" asked Jordan. Malik leaned forward. "I think they're preparing a case. That's what this sounds like." AOC rubbed her forehead. "They're not just coming for me," she said. "They want to send a message. Don't help them. Don't speak up." Her campaign manager, Luis, chimed in. "Then we hit back harder. Get every constitutional lawyer we can. Put their names on a statement. Get ahead of it." But AOC didn't answer right away. She stared out the window. On the street below, a group of high school students was walking past the building, laughing, backpacks slung over one shoulder. Normal life. So far away from what she was dealing with. Her voice was soft but steady. "If they want to scare me, it's not going to work. I've seen worse." But just as her team started fighting back with words and strategy, the DOJ was quietly drafting something far more dangerous than a letter, something that would turn this fight into a national crisis. By the time AOC's letter reached the Department of Justice, the decision had already been made. Pam Bondi had been in several closed-door meetings that week in Sacramento and then again in Reno. Officially, they were about immigration strategy. Unofficially, they were about optics, how this would look, who it would affect, and how far they could push before it looked personal. Tom Homan's voice was the loudest in the room. She knew what she was doing, he said firmly, arms crossed, pacing across a DOJ conference room. You can't educate people on how to avoid law enforcement and call it constitutional guidance. That's interference. Others weren't so sure, not because they doubted the claim, but because of the fallout. Bondi knew the political firestorm this would cause. She'd seen the numbers, the social media data, the blowback already building, but she also saw something else, opportunity. The narrative was already taking shape. AOC, the face of progressivism, had overstepped. She wasn't just making speeches anymore. She was interfering in active immigration operations, and in some corners of government, that was a line you didn't cross. Still, Bondi was cautious. The DOJ couldn't appear partisan. That's why they worked through back channels first, collecting statements, digital records, transcripts of the webinar, and even past town hall speeches. They wanted a pattern, not an isolated incident. What they found was enough to draft a warrant, but it was AOC's follow-up letter, sent directly to Bondi's office, that made the situation combustible. It was short, barely 2 pages. In it, she asked a single direct question. Am I under federal investigation? No fluff, no legalese, just straight to the point. Bondi didn't answer, at least not officially, but within 48 hours, the warrant was drafted. It wasn't for arrest, not yet, but it gave the DOJ the authority to subpoena AOC's communications related to the webinar and any other guidance her office may have provided to undocumented immigrants. It also gave them control over the narrative. A leak, intentional or not, followed days later. A memo made its way into a reporter's inbox at a small media outlet in Reno. Within hours, the story spread. DOJ's AOC over ICE webinar. AOC's phone didn't stop ringing. Calls came in from advocacy groups, lawyers, political allies, and even rivals. Some wanted to help. Others warned her to be careful. A few, mostly moderates, suggested she issue a public apology to de-escalate the situation. She refused. "This isn't about me," she told her team. "They're just trying to see if they can scare people like me into silence. If I back down, they'll come after someone else next, probably someone without the platform I have." Luis agreed, "But they're playing dirty now," he said. "This isn't Twitter beef. This is federal muscle." And they could all feel it. The tone had changed. What started as a political dust-up was now a legal situation with real consequences and real danger. To stay ahead, her team brought in legal counsel. Not the usual campaign lawyers, but constitutional scholars, civil rights attorneys, and people who had gone up against the DOJ before. They held briefings every night from a rented conference room at a Fresno hotel. It was in one of those briefings that Malik said something no one wanted to hear. "If they're pulling records," he said, "flipping through an email chain from months ago, they might go after staff, interns, volunteers. This is about more than the warrant. It's about intimidation." OC leaned back in her chair. She didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she looked up. "Then we protect them, every single one." But while her legal team prepped and her staff circled the wagons, the outside world was catching up. And the public reaction would turn a political crisis into a cultural war. Within hours of the memo leak, the country split like a cracked windshield. In Springfield, Missouri, a small protest formed outside a federal building, just 8 people at first. By the next day, it was over 200. A mix of students, immigrants, and retirees held up hand-painted signs. "Knowing your rights isn't a crime. Hands off AOC. Education obstruction." Meanwhile, across the country in Yuma, Arizona, a different scene played out. A town hall meeting turned tense when a local official praised the DOJ's move. A man in the crowd stood up and shouted, "It's about time someone held her accountable." Another woman replied, "For what? Telling people to read the Constitution?" The room erupted. Voices clashed. Tempers flared. Security had to step in. Cable news jumped on the divide. One network framed it as law and order finally holding the far left accountable. Another called it political retaliation dressed up as justice. Every panel, every podcast, every morning show had something to say. But it was the internet that carried the fire. Hashtags trended for days. Hashtag we stand with AOC. Hashtag Bondi. Overreach. Hashtag know your rights. On TikTok, teens made videos reenacting parts of the webinar. On Facebook, parents shared posts warning that if they can target her, they can target you next. In rural Ohio, a middle school civics teacher named Aaron Lavoie uploaded a video explaining the Fourth Amendment using AOC's webinar as a case study. She didn't take sides, just laid out the facts. Her post went viral. 10 million views in 3 days. But there was another side. In the southern part of El Paso, a local ICE agent, off the record, told a reporter he was tired of being painted as the bad guy. "She's telling people not to talk to us," he said. "How are we supposed to do our job when elected officials are undercutting us?" He wasn't the only one who felt that way. A group of former law enforcement officers published a public letter in support of the DOJ, arguing that no lawmaker should interfere with federal agents, no matter the intent. At the same time, legal experts flooded the airwaves. Some argued that the warrant represented a blatant overreach. Some suggested it could be valid, contingent on the contents of AOC's internal emails. A commentator remarked that this issue extends beyond immigration alone. It revolves around influence. Who determines the line between legal advice and obstruction? The clamor surrounding AOC grew overwhelming. In her DC apartment, she lingered into the night, immersed in comments, perusing headlines, and absorbing voice notes from friends. Some expressed their frustration. Some felt a sense of fear. A message from a former high school teacher in the Bronx conveyed a heartfelt sentiment. "Stay strong, Mija. They simply fear what you embody." She remained silent. She lingered on the edge of her bed, phone cradled in her hand, gazing thoughtfully out the window. A vehicle glided past beneath. Amidst the urban landscape, existence continued to unfold. The following day, she broadcasted live on Instagram, without a script or any notes. She expressed her lack of surprise to her viewers. Expression calm, tone subdued. When you advocate for those without power, those in authority will attempt to suppress you. However, I didn't embark on this journey to take the easy route. She halted, allowing the stillness to linger. If aiding individuals in grasping their rights labels me a criminal, then we must reflect on the kind of nation we are evolving into. The responses poured in, filled with hearts, flames, and applause. Yet, beneath every tap on a screen lay an individual pondering the very same question. The narrative had evolved beyond AOC. It had transformed into a mirror of all that simmered just below the surface. The nation stood in stark contrast. The regulations seemed delicate, and the earth beneath one's feet could change in an instant. Yet, while the public was embroiled in conflict and the headlines blared, a different narrative unfolded discreetly behind closed doors, where the cohesion of AOC's inner circle began to unravel under mounting strain. The lenses capture merely a fraction of the whole story. What they overlooked, what many fail to recognize, was the cost it was exacting in the shadows. It's not solely about AOC. It's also about the individuals in her circle. The individuals who had stood by since the very start. In the stillness of a late night in her DC apartment, she found herself seated on the floor, her back resting against the couch. The lights in the living room were turned off. A solitary desk lamp cast its gentle light from the corner. The laptop rested quietly on the cozy table, untouched for hours. The notifications continued to buzz through the quiet, yet she chose to disregard them. Opposite her was Malik, her chief of staff, his shoulders drooping and his eyes weary. "You haven't slept," he murmured softly. She shook her head, wrapping the blanket more snugly around her legs. "I am unable to do that. Whenever I shut my eyes, I find myself transported back to that room, that webinar." There was no need for him to inquire about which section. He had witnessed it by now. The instant her staffer, exuding a composed demeanor, informed viewers that they need not open the door unless presented with a signed warrant. Straightforward, legitimate, yet now turned into a tool of power. "I keep wondering," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did I exert too much pressure? Did I provide them with the justification they had been anticipating?" Malik remained silent. Not immediately. He leaned in, resting his elbows on his knees, and then raised his gaze to meet hers. "Eventually, they were bound to come after you. It was always a question of timing, never a question of possibility." She nodded, yet it offered no solace.